In the glass lobby of Foxgate Freight, my stepmother pointed at me before the entire HR department. "You owe me rent," she snapped. I pulled up my phone, showing 12 straight months of receipts to the company she designated. She didn't look. She just drove her elbow into my cheekbone, directly under the security camera. What she didn't know was that every receipt was a breadcrumb leading to a forged signature and her own seat in the 42nd floor boardroom. My name is Claire Whitlow. At 29, I was Foxgate Freight's newly minted senior specialist for supply chain optimization, a title that sounded important because my job was to see the entire chessboard of global logistics, from a container ship in the South China Sea to a last-mile delivery truck in Ohio, and make the pieces move faster, cheaper, and more efficiently. I was good at it. I saw patterns where others saw chaos. I saw the hidden connections, the invisible levers that controlled the flow of everything. It was a skill I had been honing my entire life, long before it became my profession. The Monday morning air in the lobby of Harborline Tower was a familiar, sterile cocktail, the sharp, citrus tang of industrial floor cleaner layered over the rich, dark roast of the artisanal coffee brewing at the lobby kiosk. It was the scent of corporate ambition, sunlight, cool and white, sliced through the 40-foot glass walls, glinting off the polished marble floors and the brushed steel of the elevator doors. It was a cathedral of commerce, and every quiet footstep, every hushed phone call, was a prayer to the god of the fiscal quarter. I was walking towards those elevators, my leather satchel over my shoulder, my mind already on the Q3 shipping lane projections, when the scent of Renee's perfume cut through the air. Chanel No. 5. Aggressively floral, a scent that didn't ask for attention but seized it. She wasn't alone. Renee Vale, my father's widow, the chief financial officer of Foxgate Freight, and the woman who looked at me as if I were a rounding error in her life's ledger, stood flanked by two figures I recognized from the 6th floor. Legal, Mark and Evelyn. They wore identical navy suits and expressions of professional neutrality that screamed, "This is an official and deeply unpleasant matter." They formed a small, formidable wall between me and the security turnstiles. The low hum of the lobby seemed to recede. The chatter from the coffee line faded. People were good at sensing a shift in the corporate weather patterns, and a C-suite executive with 2 lawyers descending on a mid-level specialist was the equivalent of a hurricane warning. "Claire," Renee said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a carrying quality, a finely tuned pitch designed to be overheard. "We need to discuss a private matter that has unfortunately become a company concern." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me, the diamond from my father's wedding ring catching the morning light and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny, sharp pieces. "You owe me rent?" she declared. The accusation hung in the air, thick and toxic. It was aimed not just at me, but at the dozen or so colleagues within earshot. It was designed to humiliate, to paint me as a deadbeat, a freeloader living off the family name she now controlled. I didn't flinch. I had been expecting a move, though I'll admit the sheer public audacity of this one was impressive. I slowly slid my satchel off my shoulder and set it down on the cool marble floor. Then, I took out my phone. My fingers were steady as I unlocked the screen and opened my banking app. I navigated to the transaction history, my thumb swiping with practiced calm. "Renee," I said, my voice even, professional. I turned the screen towards her, and by extension, towards Mark and Evelyn from legal. "As you can see, the rent has been transferred on the 1st of every month for the past 12 months. In full, to the holding company you instructed me to pay." On the screen, a neat, undeniable column of digital evidence. 12 identical entries, each for the same amount, each sent from my account to a recipient clearly labeled Whitlow Properties, LLC. The 2 lawyers leaned in slightly, their eyes scanning the list. I saw a flicker of something in Evelyn's gaze, not surprise, but a dawning realization that she had been brought here under false pretenses. Renee didn't even glance at the screen. Her eyes, a pale, cold blue, were locked on mine. She was a predator who had just watched her prey calmly dismantle the trap she'd laid. It infuriated her. "It's all paid," I stated. A simple fact. I lowered my phone. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her perfume was cloying, suffocating. She lowered her voice to a venomous whisper, a sound far more threatening than her public declaration had been. "You are living on a name you did nothing to earn. You are living in a building my husband built. You are living on my name." "I'm living on a lease," I corrected her, keeping my voice just as low. "A legal document, and my name is Whitlow, the same as the company founders." That was the mistake. Reminding her of him. Reminding her that her entire position, her power, was borrowed, married into, not earned. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of Botox and expensive serums, tightened. The curated civility vanished, and for a split second, I saw the raw, grasping woman my father had inexplicably fallen for. The blow came without warning. It wasn't a slap. It was something harder, more deliberate. She drove the point of her elbow upward, a short, vicious arc that connected with my right cheekbone. The sound was shockingly loud in the suddenly silent lobby. A sharp, wet crack that echoed off the stone and glass. It was the sound of bone hitting bone. A starburst of white-hot pain exploded behind my eye. My head snapped to the side, my hair whipping across my face. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth instantly. For a single, suspended moment, the entire world was just that sound and the thrumming, agonizing pulse below my eye. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw the security guard at the main desk, a good man named Frank, start to rise from his chair, his hand moving instinctively towards his radio. Then he stopped. He looked at me, his face a mask of conflict, and then at Renee, the CFO, his boss's boss's boss. His hand fell back to his side. He was frozen by the invisible chains of the corporate hierarchy. My colleagues, the ones who had been pretending not to listen, were now staring openly, their faces pale with shock. They were statues in a museum of workplace horror. No one moved. No one spoke. In this cathedral, Renee was the high priestess, and she had just performed a blood sacrifice. I drew in a slow, ragged breath, the air stinging the split skin in my mouth. I didn't raise a hand to my face. I didn't cry out. I turned my head back slowly to face her. Her chest was heaving slightly, a faint flush on her cheeks. She looked triumphant. I held her gaze for a long moment, letting the silence stretch, letting everyone see her, and everyone see me. Then, I broke the stare and looked past her, my eyes finding the small dark dome of the security camera mounted on the wall above the turnstiles. Camera C4, the one with the clearest view of the entrance. My voice, when I spoke, was unnaturally calm. It cut through the thick silence like a scalpel. I addressed Frank, the security guard. "Frank," I said, clearly and without a tremor. "I need a copy of the security footage from camera C4. Please log the time." I glanced at the large digital clock on the wall. The time is 8:17 a.m. It was a request, but it sounded like an order. It was procedure. It was business. It snapped him out of his paralysis. He nodded, his eyes wide, and began typing furiously at his console. Renee's triumph evaporated, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then alarm. This was not the reaction she had expected. She had wanted tears, fear, submission. I was giving her paperwork. I reached down and picked up my satchel. Without another glance at her or the lawyers, who now looked profoundly uncomfortable, I turned and walked away from the elevators, back towards the lobby entrance. As I walked, I pulled out my phone again. My fingers moved swiftly across the screen, my right eye blurring slightly from the impact. I opened a messaging app and sent a single, pre-written text to a single contact. Assault 817. A moment later, my phone vibrated with an automated reply. Package delivered. That package was a meticulously organized, encrypted folder of evidence I had been compiling for 6 months. It had just been automatically emailed to 3 specific people: the chairman of the board, the head of the ethics committee, and the company's chief counsel. The text message was the key. The assault was the trigger. I could feel a warm trickle of blood tracing a path from the corner of my mouth down my chin. I made no move to wipe it away. Let them see it. Let Frank's report mention it. Let the camera record it. It was evidence. It was an exhibit. And it needed to be documented. In full. On the company's official medical incident report. Which was my next stop. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the crisp Graybridge morning, I didn't look back. The game had been her choice, but I had been setting the board for months, and her first move had just cost her the queen. The company medical office on the 3rd floor smelled of rubbing alcohol and quiet efficiency. A nurse with kind, tired eyes gently cleaned the cut on my cheekbone. The sting was a distant, secondary sensation, a footnote to the deep, throbbing ache beneath the skin. She worked in silence, her professionalism a welcome shield. She didn't ask questions beyond the procedural ones. "How did this happen?" she'd inquired, her pen poised over a form. "An object struck my face in the main lobby," I replied, my voice flat. "An elbow, to be specific." I gave her the time, the location, and the name of the other party involved. I watched her write Renee Vale, CFO, in the assailant field without a change in her expression. Here, in this small, sterile room, titles were just data points on an incident report. My father, Arthur Whitlow, would have hated this. He would have hated the cold formality of it all, the reduction of an act of violence to a series of checkboxes. He founded Foxgate Freight 40 years ago with 1 leased truck and an almost religious belief in the tangible world. He smelled of sea salt and diesel, not boardrooms and cologne. His world was made of steel containers, weathered docks, and the complex, beautiful dance of logistics that moved real things from one point on a map to another. He saw the world in shipping lanes and timetables, and he built an empire on the simple principle of keeping his word. He passed away 6 months ago. A sudden, quiet finality of a heart attack in his study, his reading glasses still resting on an open bill of lading. Renee entered his life like a hostile takeover. She arrived 3 years ago, a whirlwind of calculated charm and corporate networking. She was a portfolio manager from a private equity firm, sharp and beautiful in a way that seemed both aspirational and predatory. My father, a man who could negotiate with the toughest union bosses in the country, was utterly disarmed by her. He was lonely. She was available. It was a merger of convenience that he mistook for love. 3 months after the wedding, Foxgate's CFO of 25 years, a loyal company man named George Finney, who had started with my father in the warehouse, announced his retirement. The official company memo cited personal and health reasons. The unofficial rumor was that George had questioned a series of restructuring proposals put forth by Renee. George left on a Friday. On Monday, Renee's appointment as the new CFO was announced. It was, the press release noted, a natural and seamless transition, bringing a fresh financial perspective to the company. I knew a coup when I saw one. She hadn't just married my father. She had acquired a controlling interest in his life's work. The apartment I lived in, a modest 1-bedroom in a building downtown, was part of that life's work. My father had established the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust years ago. He bought the building to provide affordable, stable housing for employees, a buffer against the city's skyrocketing rents. It was one of his proudest achievements, a tangible expression of his belief that a company was a family. As his daughter and an employee, I was a beneficiary. My lease stipulated a symbolic rent, a small monthly payment that was more about acknowledging the agreement than generating profit. The money went directly to the trust, which handled the building's maintenance. For years, the automatic payment was a simple, unnoticed transaction. Then my father died. At the first post-funeral dinner, a tense, miserable affair in the cavernous dining room of the house I grew up in, Renee slid a piece of paper across the polished mahogany table. "Just some administrative cleanup, darling," she'd said, her voice smooth as silk. "With Arthur gone, I'm standardizing the company's assets. All housing payments will now be routed through a centralized entity. It's more efficient." The paper was a new payment instruction form. The recipient was no longer the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust. It was a company I'd never heard of, Whitlow Properties, LLC. The name was a particular cruelty, a twisting of my own identity into a tool for her. I looked at her, this woman wearing my mother's pearls and sitting in my father's chair. I saw the lie plain as day. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about control. This was the first move in her campaign to sever every tie I had to my father's legacy. I was the difficult daughter, the one who worked her way up through the ranks on merit, rather than accepting a token VP position. The one who saw her for what she was. So I smiled. I nodded. "Of course. Renee," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "Just send me the new details." I took the form, folded it neatly, and placed it in my purse. And in that moment, the hunt began. I would comply. I would be the dutiful stepdaughter. I would pay the money to her shell company. And I would save every single digital receipt as a bullet for a gun she didn't even know I was building. Life became a performance in 2 acts. At home, or rather, in the sterile, museum-like house she now commanded, I was a burden. Every conversation she initiated was a subtle, or not so subtle, lecture on costs. The cost of maintaining the estate, the cost of property taxes, the cost of the life my father had saddled her with. I was an expensive, inconvenient piece of her inheritance. At the office, I was the walking conflict of interest. In meetings, if I presented a logistics plan that contradicted one of her financial models, she would dismiss it with a wave of her hand and that poisonous label. "Well, Claire obviously has a vested family interest in the old way of doing things," she'd say, smiling at the other executives. It was a brilliant, insidious strategy. She used my very name, the name of the company's founder, to discredit me. She painted me as a relic, a sentimental fool clinging to the past while she, the visionary, steered the company toward a leaner, more profitable future. I learned to live in the space between breaths. When the urge to scream, to fight back, to expose her in those meetings rose in my throat, I would focus on the rhythm of my own lungs. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. It was a silent, internal rebellion. I learned that tears were a concession, a surrender of emotional control she would feast on. So I didn't cry. I catalogued. Every snide remark, every dismissive gesture, every professionally sabotaging comment was filed away in my memory, dated and cross-referenced. The world had become a place of surfaces, and I no longer trusted what I couldn't prove. I developed a new habit. Any important document I had to sign, any personal form, any piece of paperwork that required my signature. I signed at my desk at home. I would turn on my laptop's webcam, hold the document up to the lens, and then sign it clearly in the frame. The video file, with its embedded, unalterable timestamp, became my digital notary. It was a practice born of watching Renee operate, watching her deftly rewrite history with backdated memos and rediscovered agreements. I would not be erased by a forged signature. I was creating my own blockchain of truth, one small recorded act at a time. The nurse finished placing a sterile bandage over the cut. "All done," she said softly. "The doctor will be in to see you in a moment to finalize the report. We'll need photos for the record." "Of course," I said. "Thank you." She left, closing the door quietly behind her. I stood up and walked to the small mirror over the sink. The woman looking back at me was pale, her face already beginning to swell. A deep, ugly purple was blooming across her cheekbone, a stark contrast to her white silk blouse. There was a smear of dried blood on her chin she hadn't wiped away. She looked like a victim, but her eyes were clear, cold, and entirely focused. They were the eyes of a supply chain analyst who had just identified the critical weakness in the system and was preparing to exploit it with maximum efficiency. The bruise wasn't an injury, it was a receipt, and it was time to make a final accounting. The doctor was a man in his late 50s with a calm demeanor that had likely seen every conceivable workplace injury, from paper cuts to panic attacks. He photographed my bruised cheek from 3 different angles, the clinical flash of his camera punctuating the quiet room. "The report will be filed with HR and a copy will be sent to legal," he said, his voice a neutral, professional hum. "Standard procedure in an assault case." Assault. The word had a clean, legal weight to it. It was a data point, just like the digital receipts I had spent the last 6 months curating. As he spoke, my mind wasn't in that sterile room. It was back in my apartment, 3 months ago, sitting in front of my laptop with a cup of black coffee. The city lights of Greybridge spread out below me like a circuit board. That was when the first piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. It started, as it had ended, with the receipts. Each month, I would log into my bank account, make the transfer to Whitlow Properties LLC, and save a PDF of the confirmation. A simple, disciplined routine. For the first few months, they were just entries in a list. But as an analyst, I'm trained to see patterns in data, and something about the recipient's information felt wrong. It was too generic, too thin. One night, I opened the first receipt and stared at the mailing address Renee had provided for the LLC. P.O. Box 714, Greybridge. A standard post office box. But the zip code was familiar. I ran a quick search. It was the same zip code as the Foxgate Freight Regional Document Storage Facility, a massive, climate-controlled warehouse out by the old rail yard where the company kept its paper archives. Why would a property management company have its official address at a document warehouse? It was like listing your home address as a self-storage unit. It was a deliberate layer of misdirection. The next step was the LLC itself. Every legitimate business in the state has a registered tax identification number. I found Whitlow Properties LLC on the Secretary of State's business portal. The information was public, but minimal. Registered agent, date of incorporation, 2 weeks after my father's funeral, and a tax ID. I took that number and cross-referenced it with the city's business registry. The official address listed there wasn't the P.O. box. It was a suite number in a downtown high-rise. Suite 1450, at an address I recognized as the Greybridge Corporate Center. A quick search of that address revealed it was home to Greybridge Virtual Solutions, a company that, for a monthly fee, provides businesses with a prestigious mailing address, a phone answering service, and a virtual secretary. It was a corporate ghost, a shell. Whitlow Properties LLC didn't have an office. It had a subscription service designed to create the illusion of one. My blood ran cold, but my hands were steady on the keyboard. I pulled up the scanned copy of my original lease agreement, the one I'd signed 5 years ago. My father's signature, bold and familiar, was at the bottom. The landlord was listed clearly, the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust. There was no mention of an LLC, No clause allowing for a change in the receiving entity without a formal amendment. Then I remembered the paper Renee had given me at that first dinner after the funeral. I had scanned it that same night, part of my new paranoid archival process. I opened the file. It was a single-page document, a hastily drafted addendum to lease. It stated that, effective immediately, all payments should be directed to Whitlow Properties, LLC. It was a flimsy, unprofessional document, but at the bottom was the signature that was meant to legitimize it. A. Whitlow. My father's name. I zoomed in on the signature. It was a good copy, almost perfect. But then I saw the date printed next to it. It was dated 5 days after he had died. It was a clumsy, arrogant mistake. The kind of mistake a person makes when they believe they are untouchable, when they believe no one will ever bother to look closely. She had needed his signature to authorize the change, and she had simply manufactured it, assuming I, the grieving daughter, would be too distracted to notice the impossible timeline. The forgery was the crime, but I needed to know who held the digital pen. The addendum had been emailed to me from Renee's assistant as a PDF. I sent a message to Kevin, an old friend from my university days, who now worked in Foxgate's IT department. We'd bonded over a shared hatred for inefficient systems. My message was simple. Hey Kev, got a weird PDF. Can you check the metadata for me? Strictly confidential. His reply came back in less than 5 minutes. A single screenshot. It was the document's properties window. Under the author field, it was blank. But the line below it told the whole story. Created by RVCFO. Renee Vale, Chief Financial Officer. She had created the document with the forged signature on her own company computer, under her own user profile. The arrogance was breathtaking. With the how established, I needed the why. This couldn't just be about my small, symbolic rent payment. I started digging into the internal company servers. As a supply chain specialist, I had access to company-wide meeting schedules and project outlines. I searched for housing trust. The results painted a damning picture. For the last 4 months, Renee had been chairing a series of meetings for a new project codenamed Project Nightingale. The stated goal was the privatization and optimization of non-essential corporate assets. The housing trust was at the top of the list. Her plan, laid out in a series of PowerPoint presentations, was to dissolve the trust, sell off the building to a private real estate firm, and absorb the cash into the company's operating budget, a move that would look great on a quarterly report and undoubtedly trigger a handsome performance bonus for the CFO. My rent being diverted to her LLC wasn't the main goal. It was the pilot program. She was testing the system, seeing if she could siphon funds from the trust without anyone noticing, before she dismantled it entirely. I knew then that simply exposing the fraud wasn't enough. I needed to build a cage for her, made of her own actions. The assault that morning was a gift I hadn't anticipated, but the trap had already been set for months. Starting with my 10th rent payment, 3 months ago, I had made a change. I went to my bank and opened a third-party escrow account, a legally neutral holding account managed by a bonded agent. The beneficiary of the account was named as the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust. Then, on the 1st of the month, I would perform 2 transactions. First, I sent the required amount to Renee's ghost company, Whitlow Properties, LLC. Then, I sent the exact same amount to the escrow account. I created a spreadsheet on my personal, encrypted laptop. Column A, date. Column B, payment to Whitlow Properties, LLC, colored in blue. Column C, payment to escrow in the name of the trust, colored in orange. The blue column was the evidence of her theft. The orange column was the proof of my good faith, a clear demonstration that I was attempting to pay my rightful landlord while protecting the funds from a potential dispute. The difference between the 2 columns, the money sitting in her LLC's bank account, was the bait. I made one final, quiet move. I navigated the labyrinth of the company's internal legal forms and found a rarely used one, a beneficiary verification request. It was a simple, one-page document typically used in estate planning, allowing a beneficiary of a trust to request a formal audit and confirmation of their status from the trustees. I filled it out, citing my residency and my original lease, and submitted it to the legal department. It was a small, bureaucratic piece of paper that no one would pay attention to, but it started a legal clock ticking. It forced the company, by its own rules, to investigate the health and status of the housing trust, an investigation that would inevitably lead them to a dead founder's signature and a ghost LLC registered to a virtual office. The doctor clipped his pen back into his pocket. "Okay, Claire, we're done here. The report is time-stamped 8:52 a.m. I nodded. Sliding off the examination table, I had my medical report, the last receipt I needed, the physical proof of her desperation. The rest of the evidence was already locked, loaded, and waiting for a single command to fire. I didn't go back to my desk. My workspace, an open-plan pod on the 27th floor, was now a fishbowl. Instead, I took the stairs down one flight to a small, unassigned quiet room tucked away behind the marketing department's storage closet. It was a soulless little box, furnished with a single chair and a small Formica desk, designed for private phone calls and moments of corporate desperation. It was perfect. The air was still and smelled faintly of old paper. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. I sat down, placed my laptop on the desk, and powered it on. The throbbing in my cheek was a steady, rhythmic metronome, a physical reminder of the stakes. I ignored it. Pain was just data. First, the formality. I used my phone to dial the Foxgate Freight Anonymous Whistleblower hotline. It was an outsourced service, a legal firewall for the company. A recorded, dispassionate female voice answered on the first ring. "You have reached the Veritas Compliance Hotline. This call may be recorded for quality assurance. If you wish to remain anonymous, please do not state your name." I waited for the beep. "My name is Claire Whitlow," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I am a senior specialist in the supply chain division. I am not calling to remain anonymous. I am calling to make a formal, named complaint against the Chief Financial Officer, Renee Vale." I let that hang in the air for a moment for the benefit of the recording. "The complaint involves two parts," I continued, speaking to the anonymous operator who was likely listening in from a call center 1,000 miles away. 1. Physical assault resulting in injury, which occurred in the Harborline Tower lobby at approximately 8:17 a.m. this morning. An official medical report has been filed with the company physician. 2. A systematic scheme of financial fraud involving the diversion of funds from the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust into a privately owned shell corporation. The recorded voice interjected, "You may submit any supporting documentation through our secure online portal. Please state your case number for reference." "My case number is CWFF1011, I said, inventing a number on the spot. "However, I will not be using your portal. I am sending my documentation directly to the relevant parties. This call is simply to create a time-stamped official record of my initial report. The time is now 9:14 a.m. I ended the call. The hotline was a tool for frightened people. It was designed to contain and neutralize complaints, to bury them in process. I was not frightened, and I had no intention of being contained. My complaint would not be entering a queue. It would be landing like a bomb on the desks of the three most powerful people in the company, bypassing the entire bureaucratic apparatus designed to protect executives like Renee. On my laptop, I opened my email. I had 3 drafts, written and revised over weeks, waiting for this exact moment. The recipients were already loaded. David Morrison, the acting chairman of the board, Eleanor Vance, the retired judge who chaired the Ethics and Compliance Committee, and Marcus Thorne, the company's general counsel. The subject line for all three was identical, crafted to be both informative and impossible to ignore. Urgent. Formal complaint regarding financial misconduct and workplace violence by CFO Renee Vale. In the body of the email, I was brief and brutally efficient. I outlined the allegations in sterile, bullet-pointed language. I cited the relevant sections of the corporate code of conduct that had been violated. And then, I provided the key. A complete dossier of supporting evidence can be found at the following secure link. I wrote, I pasted the hyperlink to the encrypted folder I had created. The folder was named Rent Loop. Inside that folder, nestled in neatly labeled subdirectories, was the architecture of her downfall. Receipts, 12 PDF files, one for each payment made to Whitlow Properties, LLC, a monotonous, undeniable record of compliance with her fraudulent instructions. Contracts, a side-by-side comparison document. On the left, my original lease with the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust. On the right, her forged addendum. The date on my father's falsified signature was highlighted in bright, accusatory red. Metadata, the screenshot from Kevin in IT, showing the PDF addendum was created by user RVCFO, the digital smoking gun. Corporate structure, the public filings for Whitlow Properties, LLC, tracing it to the virtual office and exposing it as a shell. Financials, the color-coded spreadsheet detailing my parallel payments into the escrow account, demonstrating my good faith effort to pay the legitimate trust. And then, the final file, the one I had just uploaded from my phone. It was a raw, unedited image file, IMG 88177 JPG. It was the photo the doctor had taken just minutes before, a high-resolution, clinically lit image of my bruised and swollen face. The file's own metadata contained the timestamp of its creation, 8:52 a.m. It was the exclamation point to the entire package. It transformed the complaint from a dry financial dispute into something visceral, violent, and indefensible. I hit send on the first email to Chairman Morrison. The quiet click of my trackpad felt like a thrown switch. I hit send on the second email to Eleanor Vance. A second switch. I hit send on the third email to Marcus Thorne. A third. The system was now live. But I wasn't finished. I opened a new email. This one addressed only to Marcus Thorne, the General Counsel. Subject, litigation hold request. Marcus, I wrote, in light of the evidence submitted, and pursuant to company policy regarding potential litigation, I formally request an immediate and comprehensive data preservation hold be placed on all electronic communications and devices assigned to CFO Renee Vale, effective immediately. This includes all email accounts, messaging applications, and local and network drives. Please confirm receipt and execution of this request. This was the cage door swinging shut. It would prevent her from deleting a single email, a single calendar invite, a single incriminating document. Her entire digital history was now a crime scene, and I had just put up the police tape. One final email, again to all three recipients. Subject, request for emergency board meeting. Chairman Morrison, Ms. Vance, Mr. Thorne. I typed. As per Article 4, Section 3 of the Foxgate Freight Corporate Bylaws, which mandates an immediate board review in the face of credible allegations of gross misconduct or financial malfeasance by a senior officer, I formally request an emergency session of the Board of Directors be convened this afternoon to address this matter. I will make myself available to present my evidence in person. I knew the bylaws better than she did. My father had made me read them. You need to know the rules of the house you live in, Claire, he'd said. I was now using his rules to clean his house. I leaned back in the chair. The digital salvo was complete. It had taken less than 5 minutes. The silence in the small room felt different now, charged and expectant. My work was done. Now, the corporate machine, with all its gears and levers of power, had to do its work. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. No area code, just a string of digits that suggested a burner phone or a web-based messaging service. The message was a single word. Stop. My heart hammered against my ribs, just once. So, she knew, or someone who wanted to protect her knew. The system was already reacting. They were trying to intimidate me, to make me second guess, to pull back before the gears fully engaged. I took a slow breath. I thought for a moment about the perfect, cutting reply. But words were unnecessary. I opened my phone's photo gallery and found a picture I had taken as I left the lobby that morning. It was a quick, discreet shot of the security camera, the small black dome of C4 mounted against the white marble wall. It was the silent, impartial witness, the unblinking eye that had seen everything. I attached the photo to my reply, then I typed a single word beneath it. No. I hit send. The response was almost instantaneous. My phone buzzed again, but it wasn't a text message. It was a calendar notification. An email had just arrived in my corporate inbox, an invitation that had simultaneously been sent to every executive vice president and board member in the company. Subject: Mandatory Emergency Board Meeting. Time: 5:00 p.m. Location: Tidewater Conference Room, 42nd floor. Organizer: David Morrison, Acting Chairman of the Board. I closed my laptop. I stood up and walked out of the quiet room, leaving the charged silence behind me. The trap was set. The beast had been summoned. The hearing was scheduled for 5:00 p.m. The hours between 9:30 a.m. and 5:00 p.m. stretched before me. A vast, empty expanse on the clock, but a compressed and volatile space in reality. The corporate world operates on information, and I had just injected a lethal dose of it into the company's central nervous system. Now, I had to wait for the fever to take hold. I spent the time not at my desk, but in the company library on the 12th floor, a quiet, wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and floor polish. It was the least trafficked place in the building, a relic from a pre-digital age. I sat in a worn leather armchair, not reading, but thinking. I was thinking about the company bylaws. Corporate bylaws are, for most employees, a piece of abstract legalese they agree to on their first day and never think of again. They are the company's constitution, its foundational code. Most of it is boilerplate language about shareholder meetings and officer duties. But buried deep within the Foxgate Freight bylaws, in an addendum added during the last corporate governance overhaul, was Article 12, Section 7, the Morals Clause. It was a piece of legal ordinance, designed to be used only in the most extreme circumstances. It stipulated that any C-level executive formally and credibly accused of an act of violence or moral turpitude on company property would be subject to immediate, automatic sanctions pending a full board review. It was a kill switch. And I knew exactly where it was and how it worked, because 1.5 years ago, I had helped write the operational commentary for it. My father had been spearheading the governance update. He'd brought me into a meeting with the legal team, not as his daughter, but as a logistics specialist. The lawyers know the law, he'd told me, but they don't know how the business actually works. I want you to read every line and tell us how someone could break it, bend it, or twist it to their advantage. I want you to find the loopholes before anyone else does. So I spent 2 weeks with the legal team, annotating the draft. When we got to the morals clause, I pointed out a flaw. The original language was vague, leaving the accused executive in their position until a formal verdict was reached. This is a weak point, I'd argued. If a powerful executive is accused, they can use their authority to tamper with the investigation, intimidate witnesses, or destroy evidence. You have to neutralize their power the instant the accusation is deemed credible. The lawyers had listened. The clause was rewritten. Upon activation by the chairman and the head of the ethics committee, 2 things happened immediately. First, The accused executive's financial signatory power was suspended. They couldn't approve a catering order, let alone a multi-million-dollar wire transfer. Their financial authority was frozen in carbonite. Second, the company was required to bring in an independent third-party counsel to oversee the board's investigation, ensuring it couldn't be whitewashed by internal politics. Renee had been in those meetings. She dismissed the morals clause as a paranoid and unnecessary piece of HR bureaucracy. She never imagined it would be used. She certainly never imagined it would be used against her. She thought she had hit me in the lobby. What she had actually done was swing a hammer at a glass case, pull a fire alarm, and activate the emergency sprinkler system all at once. The assault wasn't the main crime. It was the key. It was the jurisdictional trigger that gave the board the undeniable power to launch a full-spectrum investigation into every aspect of her conduct. Starting with her finances. The dominoes were now set up, and the first one was already falling. From the library, I made my next moves. I opened my laptop and composed another email to Marcus Thorne, the General Counsel, CCing the chairman and the head of ethics. Subject: conflict of interest and motion for recusal. Mr. Thorne, I wrote. Given that I am the complainant in the matter to be discussed at the 5:00 p.m. emergency board meeting, and CFO Renee Vale is the subject of the complaint, a direct and irreconcilable conflict of interest exists. Therefore, I formally request that Ms. Vale be required to recuse herself from the entirety of the meeting. Her presence would not only be a violation of standard governance procedure, but would also exert undue influence on the proceedings and create an intimidating environment for a key witness, namely, myself. It was a procedural checkmate. The board could not, in good faith, allow her to sit in judgment of herself. By forcing her out of the room, I was isolating her from the flow of information and denying her the chance to use her formidable charisma to spin the narrative in her favor. Then came the next piece. I knew the board would be obligated to investigate the financial claims, but I wanted to accelerate the process and direct their attention. The bylaws gave them 24 hours to begin an audit. I wanted it to begin in 1 hour. I attached a new file to another email, addressed to the same group. The file was a simple photograph. AutoPen RV Office, JPG. It was a picture I had taken discreetly with my phone months ago during a meeting in her office. It was a picture of her AutoPen. The machine sat on a mahogany credenza behind her desk, a sleek, sophisticated piece of equipment. It was a SignaScript 5000, a high-end signature machine used by executives and politicians to automatically sign stacks of letters and documents. With a flick of a switch, a small, articulated steel arm holding a fountain pen could perfectly replicate a person's signature. My father had loathed the thing. A man's signature is his bond, he used to say. You don't outsource your bond to a robot. Renee, however, loved it. It was a symbol of her efficiency, her importance. In the email, I wrote, "For the board's consideration, please find attached a photograph of the signature replication device located in the CFO's office. I believe it may be relevant to the investigation into the forged signature on the lease addendum, dated 5 days after Arthur Whitlow's death." I let the implication hang there. I didn't accuse. I merely presented an anomaly, an impossible signature, and the existence of a machine that creates perfect signatures. But the photograph was just the appetizer. The main course was the file I attached next. It was a screenshot of a work order from the Foxgate internal maintenance system. AutoPen Maintenance Log, PDF. I had found it weeks ago, buried in the digital archives. Every piece of office equipment was subject to a quarterly preventative maintenance schedule. The AutoPen, being a sensitive piece of machinery, was no different. The log was brutally simple. It showed the date of service, the technician's name, and the action taken. And there it was. An entry for a pen pressure recalibration and software update for the SignaScript 5000 in the CFO's office. The date of the service was the exact same day that the forged addendum had been created. The machine wasn't just present in her office. It had been serviced and used on the precise day my dead father's signature had been magically resurrected to divert my rent money. My final sentence in the email was crafted to be devastating in its simplicity. I am not suggesting how Mr. Whitlow's signature came to be on a document created after his passing. I am merely providing the board with the maintenance records for the device designed to replicate it. I will let the machine's service log speak for itself. I hit send. The time was 2:15 p.m. I had laid everything on the table before she even knew what game was being played. She would be preparing a defense against an assault charge, a simple HR matter she thought she could crush with her authority. She would walk into that 5 p.m. meeting expecting to talk about a family squabble that spilled into the workplace. Instead, she would be walking into a full-blown financial fraud investigation, triggered by her own violent outburst, with her signatory power already stripped, an independent counsel watching, and a stack of evidence pointing to a forged signature and the precise documented use of the machine that made it. I closed my laptop. The trap wasn't just in the bylaws, it was in her own arrogance. It was in her belief that the rules didn't apply to her, that the machinery of the company she commanded would always protect her. But a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and I had just proven, with documentation, that the person in charge of the money was the most compromised part in the entire system. The Tidewater conference room on the 42nd floor was a temple of corporate power. A single, colossal slab of polished gray granite served as the table, surrounded by 20 high-backed leather chairs. The western wall was a sheet of floor-to-ceiling glass, and as I walked in at 4:58 p.m., the late afternoon sun was setting fire to the clouds over Graybridge Harbor. The room was already occupied. David Morrison, the acting chairman, sat at the head of the table, his face grim. Eleanor Vance, the retired judge, was to his right, her expression unreadable. Marcus Thorne, the general counsel, and 6 other board members were arranged around the table, a silent jury. There was one empty chair, Renee's. My request for her recusal had been granted. I was not offered a seat at the table. Instead, a lectern had been placed at the far end, facing the chairman. It felt like a witness stand. It was exactly what I wanted. I placed my laptop on the lectern, connected it to the room's projector, and waited. At precisely 5 p.m., Chairman Morrison cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitlow," he began, his voice a low baritone that filled the room. "The board has reviewed the preliminary materials you submitted. They are deeply troubling. You have the floor." I took a breath. "Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board." My voice was calm, my hands steady. I clicked a single button, and the massive screen behind the chairman came to life. On it, a simple color-coded spreadsheet. "This is a story about 2 parallel streams of money," I began, my voice as neutral as if I were presenting a quarterly logistics report. "For the past 12 months, I have been making a monthly rent payment as stipulated by my lease agreement with the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust. However, following my father's death, I was instructed by the CFO to direct those payments to a new entity, Whitlow Properties, LLC. I pointed to the screen. The column in blue represents the 12 payments made, as instructed, to the LLC. The total is displayed at the bottom. The column in orange, however, represents 12 identical payments made on the same dates. These payments were deposited into a third-party escrow account. A murmur went through the room. Marcus Thorne leaned forward slightly. "I opened this escrow account to protect the funds in case of a legal dispute." I continued. "I wanted to demonstrate a consistent, good-faith effort to pay my rent to the rightful landlord, and the beneficiary of that escrow account is, and always has been, the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust." On the screen, I displayed the escrow agreement. The name of the trust was clearly visible, along with the name of the independent custodian, a respected local attorney named Samuel Harris. "Mr. Harris is waiting on a video call," I said. "With your permission, Mr. Chairman?" Morrison nodded. I clicked again, and a window popped up on the screen showing a man in a book-lined office. "Mr. Harris?" I said. "For the record, can you confirm that you are the independent custodian for the escrow account in question?" "I can," he confirmed, his voice crisp and clear through the room's speakers. "And to your knowledge," I asked, "has the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust ever authorized a third-party entity named Whitlow Properties LLC to collect rental income on its behalf?" "Absolutely not," Harris replied without hesitation. "The Trust's charter has no provision for such a delegation of collection authority. Any funds due to the Trust must be paid directly to the Trust." "Thank you, Mr. Harris." I closed the video link. The first nail had been driven. The LLC had no legal standing to collect my rent. The money I had paid them was, legally speaking, stolen. But the fraud is deeper than a simple misdirection of funds. I went on. It's a case of double dipping. I brought up a new set of documents, scanned invoices. While Whitlow Properties LLC was collecting my rent, the actual maintenance and utility costs for my apartment, as with all apartments in the building, continued to be paid by Foxgate, through the Trust's operational budget. Here are the invoices for my unit's HVAC servicing in August and a plumbing repair in October. Both were paid by our own facilities department, from the Trust's budget. So, the question is, what were my payments to the LLC being used for, if not the building's upkeep? I didn't wait for an answer. I displayed another document. This one a redacted payroll slip for Renee's personal assistant, a young woman named Tiffany. It showed her base salary, and then a curious line item under monthly stipends. It read, "Housing Inspection Allowance, $500. I cross-referenced this with our HR department's compensation codes. I said, "There is no such thing as a housing inspection allowance at Foxgate Freight. It's a phantom fee, a way to skim cash from the LLC's income and pass it to a loyal subordinate, disguised as a legitimate expense. My investigation suggests that my rent, and possibly the rent of several other long-term residents in the Trust building, was being funneled into a private slush fund operated by the CFO." The room was utterly silent now, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. I let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the next blow. The LLC's official address is a P.O. box at the same zip code as our records warehouse. On a hunch, I asked a contact in the maintenance department who services that facility to keep an eye out for anything unusual. 2 weeks ago, while retrieving archived tax documents, his company-issued body camera recorded this. I played a short, silent video clip. The perspective was shaky, looking down as a man in a work uniform sorted through boxes. He pushes one aside, revealing a plain manila envelope tucked behind it. He picks it up. Scrawled on the front in Renee's distinctive handwriting is a single word, June. The worker opens the unsealed flap, revealing a thick stack of $100 bills. He quickly puts it back and slides the box in front of it. The clip ended. "Cash," I said softly. "Untraceable. Taken from an account funded by employee rent payments and stashed in a company facility, a slush fund." David Morrison, the chairman, finally spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "Ms. Whitlow, this is all very compelling. But a corporation is just a piece of paper. The critical question is this: who is the actual owner, the principal, of Whitlow Properties LLC? This was the moment. That is the most important question, Mr. Chairman." I agreed. I clicked my mouse, and the LLC's Articles of Incorporation filled the screen. It was a standard, boilerplate document, and there, on line 3, under name of registered principal, was a name none of them had ever heard. Mr. Daniel Petrov. I let them stare at the unfamiliar name. According to the state of Graybridge, I said. Mr. Daniel Petrov is the sole owner and operator of Whitlow Properties, LLC. And who is Daniel Petrov? Eleanor Vance asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. I was curious about that myself, I replied. So I hired a private investigator. I gave him one task: find Mr. Petrov and ask him about his company. It took him less than a day. He found him at the Graybridge bus terminal. I clicked one last time. The screen changed to a new video. The footage was grainy, clearly filmed from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed a man in his late 60s, with a matted gray beard and wearing a frayed army jacket, sitting on a bench, sipping from a paper cup. He looked tired and unwell. The investigator's voice could be heard off camera. Mr. Petrov? The man looked up, his eyes wary. Who's asking? I just have a question about a company, Whitlow Properties, LLC. The state says you're the owner. A flicker of understanding, and then fear, crossed the man's face. He shook his head. I ain't no owner of nothin'. Look at me. Do I look like an owner? But you signed the papers. The investigator's voice pressed gently. The registration documents. The man sighed, a cloud of vapor in the cold air. He looked around, as if afraid of being overheard. Look, mister, some lady came here a while back. A blonde woman, dressed real nice, smelled like flowers. She offered me $200, cash, said she needed a name on some papers for a new business, and that mine would do. She said it was all legal, just a formality. I signed where she told me to sign. She gave me the cash and left. That's all I know. A blonde woman. She paid me cash. I stopped the video. The man's weary, haunted face was frozen on the giant screen behind the board of directors. A homeless man. Paid $200 to lend his name to a corporate shell designed to defraud a multi-billion-dollar company and its employees. I looked at the faces around the granite table. They were masks of cold, controlled fury. They had been made fools of. Renee Vale, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, is a blonde woman who wears expensive perfume. I didn't need to say anything else. I had given them the receipts. I had given them the motive. I had given them the victim. And now, on a giant screen in their own boardroom, I had given them the face of the conspiracy. The frozen, weary face of Daniel Petrov hung on the screen, an emblem of the entire squalid affair. The air in the Tidewater conference room was thick and heavy, like the silence after a thunderclap. The board members stared at the screen, then at me, then at the polished granite of the table, as if the answers were written in its stony grain. They had been insulated by wealth and power for so long, and I had just shown them a raw, uncomfortable piece of the real world, a world where a man's identity could be bought for $200 to facilitate a corporate crime. Into this vacuum of stunned silence, the conference room door swung open. Renee Vale strode in. She had clearly been waiting in the executive lounge, growing more impatient with every passing minute. She was dressed in a sharp, blood-red power suit, a warrior's color. She had misjudged the battle. Her face was arranged in a mask of concerned, patronizing sympathy. She surveyed the room, her eyes flicking past the board members to land on me. Standing at the lectern, she forced a small, tight laugh. David, I apologize for the intrusion, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the tense quiet. But I felt I had to step in. This has gone on long enough. She gestured towards me with a dismissive wave of her hand. The girl is agitated. Our family has been through a difficult transition since Arthur's passing. It's a messy, emotional situation, and she's clearly not thinking straight. I'm sure we can all agree this is a private family matter that has, unfortunately, and very publicly, spilled into the workplace. She was playing her last card, painting me as the hysterical, grieving daughter, unfit to be taken seriously. It was a good strategy. In another room, on another day, it might have worked. But the faces staring back at her were not sympathetic. They were the faces of people who had just watched a video of a homeless man confessing to being her pawn. I didn't look at the board. I didn't look at the chairman. I looked directly at her. I let her finish. Let the last echo of her condescension fade. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, almost conversational, but it sliced through the room's tension like a wire. Would you like to see the video of my father's signature being run by the autopen, Renee? The question landed like a physical blow. The patronizing smile on her face froze, then cracked. For a fraction of a second, raw panic flashed in her eyes before she caught it, burying it under a fresh layer of indignation. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, her voice losing its smooth, controlled modulation and taking on a sharp, brittle edge. "You're inventing fantasies." "It's not a fantasy," I said, my gaze unwavering. "It's a maintenance log." Before Renee could retort, Marcus Thorne, the general counsel, held up a hand. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at a copy of the company bylaws in front of him, the very document I had helped edit. His voice was dry, academic, and utterly damning. "For the board's clarification," he said, addressing the room but looking at Renee, "I will read from Article 7, Section 9, Subsection B, regarding posthumous financial instruments. Any financial directive, addendum, or contract amendment requiring the signature of a deceased officer of the board, most especially the chairman, is considered null and void. Any active officer found to have authorized, replicated, or otherwise affixed such a signature to a binding financial document shall be subject to immediate and indefinite suspension pending a full ethics review and potential criminal referral." He looked up from the page. "The bylaws are quite clear on this point." I clicked my mouse. The image of Daniel Petrov was replaced on the screen by the maintenance log for the autopen. Next to it, I brought up a new image, a screenshot of an email. "This is the service request for the autopen," I stated calmly. "Sent to the facilities department. The request specifies a pen pressure recalibration to be performed on a specific date." I highlighted the date on the screen. It was the same day the fraudulent lease addendum was created. "And the service was requested by—" I paused, letting my finger trace the sender's name on the screen. "Your personal assistant, Tiffany." Renee's face went white. She was trapped. Her eyes darted from the screen to me, to the stony faces of the board. The narrative of the hysterical girl had just collided with a wall of irrefutable, time-stamped data. Her corporate survival instincts took over, and she did what cornered predators do. She looked for someone to sacrifice. "This is absurd," she declared, pulling her phone from her jacket pocket. "Tiffany is a child. You've clearly confused her, manipulated her." Her fingers flew across the screen. "I'll clear this up right now." She jabbed the call button, and then the speakerphone icon. A series of tinny electronic tones echoed through the room, each one a hammer blow of suspense. Then, a small, timid voice filled the conference room. "Ms. Vale, is everything okay?" It was Tiffany. "Tiffany," Renee said, her voice a dangerous mix of sweetness and command. "I'm in a meeting with the board. There seems to be some confusion about a maintenance request you sent a few months ago for my office equipment. Can you please explain to the board why you requested service for the autopen?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. The only sound was the faint static of the open connection. The entire board leaned forward, imperceptibly. The autopen?" Tiffany's voice was barely a whisper. She sounded terrified. I just did what the calendar said. The entry you shared with me. For posthumous administrative tasks." The phrase hung in the air, a piece of horrifying corporate jargon that meant exactly what it sounded like. Renee's eyes widened. This was not the answer she expected. "What calendar, Tiffany? Be specific." The private one," the small voice stammered. the one for AW Legacy Management. The calendar entry said, Execute A.W. Signature for pending housing documents. I thought it was a standard procedure, a formality. You told me that sometimes things needed to be signed after the fact. For the record, I just followed the instructions. Did I do something wrong? The air was sucked from the room. It was a confession, made all the more devastating by its naivete. Tiffany wasn't a co-conspirator. She was a pawn, a terrified assistant who had simply followed orders she didn't understand. Renee had not only forged my father's name, she had used an innocent subordinate to pull the trigger, creating a digital paper trail that led directly back to her own shared calendar. Renee frantically stabbed the screen, ending the call, but the damage was done. The small, panicked voice still seemed to echo in the profound silence. She stared at her phone as if it had betrayed her, as if the technology itself had conspired against her. I looked at her, at the woman who had struck me that morning, who had stolen my father's legacy, who had tried to erase me. There was no triumph in my heart, only a cold, hard sense of finality, a completed calculation. You can keep my last name, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. You can call yourself Mrs. Whitlow for the rest of your life, but you can't keep your seat. David Morrison, the chairman, pushed his chair back. The sound of it scraping against the floor was like a gavel. He stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. Renee, he said, and her name was like a shard of ice. Pursuant to the bylaws of this company, you are hereby suspended as Chief Financial Officer and as a member of this board, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You will surrender your identification and all company property. We are adjourned. 2 uniformed security guards who had been waiting discreetly outside the door stepped into the room. They moved toward Renee, their presence a quiet, unarguable finality. She didn't look at the chairman. She didn't look at the board. She looked at me. Her face, stripped of its power and prestige, was a canvas of pure, undiluted hatred. It was a look that promised retribution, a look that said this was not over. One of the guards gently touched her elbow. She flinched away from him, then straightened her jacket, gathering the last shreds of her dignity. She turned and walked out of the room without another word, the 2 guards flanking her. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving a silence that was even more profound than before. I did not return to the library. I did not hide. After the door closed behind Renee and her security escort, I remained standing at the lectern for a long moment, collecting my papers, disconnecting my laptop. The board members avoided my eyes, shuffling documents, murmuring to one another. They were calculating damage, planning strategy, moving on. For them, one crisis was over, and another, the public fallout, was just beginning. I had served my purpose. I walked out of the Tidewater conference room and into the hushed, carpeted corridor of the 42nd floor. Executive territory. The air here was different, thinner. I took the elevator down. As the car descended, I could feel the atmosphere changing with each floor. The silent pressure of the executive level gave way to the hum of the legal department, then the buzz of sales, then the focused energy of my own division on 27. I stepped out, and the open plan office, which had been a low roar of activity that morning, was now eerily quiet. No one was on the phone. No one was clattering away at their keyboard. Small clusters of people stood by the windows, heads bent together, speaking in hushed tones. As I walked towards my desk, the whispers would die out, and people would suddenly find an urgent reason to study their monitors. It was like walking through a field of tall grass, each step I took causing the creatures nearby to fall silent and still. The news had not just leaked, it had saturated the entire building. It had traveled faster than any internal memo, a shockwave of gossip and speculation. I reached my desk, sat down, and looked at my screen. A dozen instant messages were blinking, all variations of the same question. Are you okay? Did you hear? What happened? I ignored them all. I was not the company spokesperson. I was not the source of gossip. I was an analyst who had presented her findings. After an hour of feigning work, I packed my satchel. It was time to leave. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor, but this time, I didn't exit through the main doors. I walked the length of the vast marble lobby, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The late afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the floor. I was walking towards the security desk, towards the exact spot where I had been struck that morning. Camera C4 watched me approach, a silent, black eye. Frank, the guard, was at his post. He saw me coming. He stood up slowly, his face serious. As I drew level with his desk, he didn't speak. He simply met my gaze and gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of respect, of apology, of acknowledgement. It was a silent admission that he had seen the abuse of power, and he had now seen its consequence. I nodded back, a small, tight gesture of my own, and continued walking. As I passed, my phone vibrated. It was a company-wide email from the Internal Communications Department. The subject line was a masterpiece of corporate neutrality. A message regarding our commitment to a safe workplace. Dear Foxgate employees, it began. Foxgate Freight is built on a foundation of integrity and mutual respect. We are committed to fostering a safe and professional environment for all members of our team. Recent events have brought this commitment into sharp focus. Please be advised that an internal investigation into a serious personnel matter is underway. While we cannot comment on the specifics of this confidential issue, we want to reassure you that the board is taking swift and decisive action to uphold our company's values. Thank you for your continued dedication. It was a perfectly crafted piece of nothing. It confirmed everything by confirming nothing. It was a legal shield, a public relations maneuver, and a warning to stop gossiping. I deleted it without a second thought. I was approaching the turnstiles when a small group of women from the accounting department stepped into my path. I didn't know them well, only enough to nod to in the break room. Their leader, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Maria, had a determined look on her face. "Claire," she said, her voice low but clear. Her friend stood behind her, a small wall of solidarity. "We just wanted to say thank you for submitting the tape, for not letting it go." I looked at their faces, and for the first time that day, I saw something other than shock or fear or pity. I saw a reflection of a shared exhaustion, the weariness of women who had spent their careers navigating the egos of powerful men, and of women like Renee. They weren't just thanking me for what I did for myself, they were thanking me for what I did for them. The impulse was to say something gracious, to acknowledge their support. But my own defenses were still too high, my own programming too ingrained. I was an analyst. I dealt in data, not sentiment. "I didn't submit a tape," I said, my voice flat. "I just submitted the receipts." Maria held my gaze for a moment, then a slow smile spread across her face. She understood. She nodded, and the group parted, letting me pass through. I stepped into an empty elevator car to go down to the parking garage. The doors slid shut, encasing me in a small, quiet box of brushed steel. Finally, for the first time since 5 p.m., I was alone. I let my head fall back against the cool metal wall and closed my eyes, just for a second. My phone vibrated in my hand. Another text from the anonymous number. It wasn't a word this time. It was a picture. The picture. IMG 8817.jpg. The high-resolution, clinically lit photo of my own bruised face. Taken in the medical office that morning. It was a violation, a theft of my own evidence, a threat. Beneath the image was a single line of text. Was it worth it? A cold dread, sharp and penetrating, cut through the exhaustion. This was Renee, or someone acting on her orders. It was a ghost reaching out from beyond her corporate grave. The question was a piece of psychological warfare, designed to make me feel regret, to frame my victory as a self-inflicted wound. My fingers were already moving before the anger could take hold. I did not reply. I did not block the number. I took a screenshot of the message. I forwarded the screenshot in an email to Marcus Thorne. The subject line was a single word: evidence. In the body, I wrote one simple declarative sentence: attempted witness intimidation and retaliatory behavior. Please add this to the file. I hit send just as the elevator chimed, signaling its arrival at the ground floor. The doors slid open, and the world exploded in a silent cacophony of light. A wall of people stood just beyond the doors. 6, maybe 7 of them. They weren't employees. They were holding cameras, microphones, phones, the local press. Flashes strobed, momentarily blinding me, turning the mundane parking garage lobby into a surreal, high-contrast nightmare. Someone had tipped them off. Miss Whitlow, is it true the CFO has been fired? Claire, can you comment on the allegations of fraud? Did Renee Vale assault you? What happened in the board meeting? The questions came in a chaotic torrent. They surged forward, a wave of hungry curiosity. I froze for a single heartbeat, trapped in the elevator doorway, the proverbial deer in the headlights. Then, my training took over. My father's training. Never talk to the press. Claire, let the work speak for itself. Anything you say can and will be twisted. I took a breath, lowered my head slightly, and walked forward. I pushed through the forest of microphones and cameras, my satchel held tight against my body. I said nothing. My silence was a wall they could not breach. I did not need to tell my story. The facts were already telling it for me in the conference rooms and law offices high above. A formal press release from Foxgate, full of sanitized legal language, would be all they got tonight. I broke through their line and pushed open the heavy glass door to the street. The air that hit me was cool and damp, carrying the briny, industrial scent of the Graybridge River. The roar of the city, the rumble of traffic, the distant horn of a ferry, enveloped me. It was the sound of the real world. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the chaos of the press behind me, the vast, indifferent city before me. I looked up at the Harbor Line Tower, a sheer cliff of glass and steel disappearing into the darkening sky. Then I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first real breath I had taken all day. The salty wind felt clean against my bruised cheek, and for the first time, I felt like I could finally breathe. I turned my back on the building and started walking, not looking back. The narrative I had presented was a closed loop, a perfect circle of evidence. The board did not adjourn. David Morrison did not move from his position at the head of the table. He simply looked at the door through which Renee had been escorted, and then turned to the company's chief auditor, a severe-looking man named Peterson, who had been summoned to the meeting and had been standing silently against the back wall. "Mr. Peterson," the chairman said, his voice flat and hard as slate. "Your team has been reviewing the CFO's discretionary accounts since this morning's initial report. Have you found any irregularities?" Peterson stepped forward, holding a tablet. He was the company's high priest of numbers, a man who could find a lie in a misplaced decimal point. "We have, Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He connected his tablet to the projector, and my presentation was replaced by a stark, black-and-white bank statement. The time on the wall clock read 5:57 p.m. The sun had set, and the city lights of Graybridge were beginning to glitter outside the panoramic window. A silent, indifferent audience. This was not a supplemental meeting. It was the final act of the same one. The execution. At 10:43 a.m. this morning, Peterson began. Acting on the preliminary evidence, we flagged a transaction that occurred 3 months ago. It was a wire transfer for $75,000, originating from the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust's operating account. He used a laser pointer to circle a single line item on the screen. The transfer was recorded. The date was clear. The amount was undeniable. "What was the justification for the transfer?" Eleanor Vance asked, her voice sharp. "The internal transfer request, authorized by the CFO, cited external consulting fees," Peterson replied. The recipient was a firm named RV Consulting. The name was new. It was a loose thread, and Peterson was about to pull it. He swiped on his tablet, and the screen changed to a new document, a state business registration form, just like the one I had shown for Daniel Petrov. "RV Consulting," Peterson announced, "is a single-member limited liability corporation. It was incorporated 3 months after the death of Arthur Whitlow." He paused, letting the timing sink in. "The registered principal and sole owner is listed as Renee Vale." A collective, sharp intake of breath went through the room. This was not a slush fund operated through a homeless proxy. This was a direct pipeline. She had paid herself $75,000 from the very employee trust my father had built, and had the audacity to disguise it as a business expense. The door to the conference room opened again. Renee stood there, flanked by the 2 security guards. She had not been taken to the lobby. She had been held in the anteroom. The chairman had clearly instructed them to bring her back for the final judgment. Her face was pale, her eyes burning with a desperate, wild fury. She had heard Peterson's reveal. "That was a legitimate business expense," she cried out, her voice raw and strained, a stark contrast to her usual polished tone. She strode towards the table, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "That was a fee for a cost-saving analysis I performed. I saved the company over $500,000 by restructuring the trust's insurance policies. I paid myself a standard consultant's fee for that work." Peterson did not flinch. He did not even look at her. He addressed the chairman. "We have searched the company's contract management system, the legal department's archives, and the CFO's own digital files, which were frozen this morning. There is no record of a consulting agreement between Foxgate Freight and RV Consulting. There is no signed contract. There is no statement of work. There is no invoice. There is only a wire transfer, authorized by Ms. Vale, to a company owned by Ms. Vale, for services that were never officially contracted. It was the final, devastating blow. The last receipt. She hadn't just stolen the money. She had been too arrogant to even create the proper paperwork to cover her tracks. She believed she was above the rules, that no one would ever dare to look. David Morrison stood to his full height. He was a tall man, and his shadow seemed to fall over the entire room. He looked at Renee, and there was no pity in his eyes, only a profound, cold disappointment. "Renee Vale," he said, his voice a low, powerful command that tolerated no argument. "The findings are clear. This board no longer recognizes your authority or your position. By unanimous resolution, you are terminated as Chief Financial Officer of Foxgate Freight, effective immediately. This is no longer just a corporate matter. We are turning the entirety of this file, including the evidence of assault, financial fraud, and embezzlement, over to the District Attorney's Office. We are done here." The finality of his words was absolute. Her suspension had been a corporate action. This was a corporate death sentence. The security guards stepped forward again, their presence more insistent this time. Renee seemed to shrink, the fight draining out of her. The blood-red suit that had looked so powerful now seemed garish, a costume for a part she could no longer play. As the guards began to lead her away, her path took her past the lectern where I still stood. She stopped, turning to face me. The boardroom, the chairman, the flashing lights of the city outside, they all fell away. For a moment, it was just the 2 of us, standing in the wreckage she had created. Her voice was a venomous whisper, laced with a disbelief so profound it was almost pathetic. "You did this," she breathed. "You ruined my entire life. For a cheap apartment? For a few $1,000s in rent?" I looked at her. At the woman who had desecrated my father's memory, who had put her hands on me in a place where I was supposed to be safe. I felt the throb in my cheek, a faint phantom echo of the morning's violence. "No," I said, my voice just as quiet, but clear and hard as a diamond. "I did this for your hand on my face, and I did this because you turned my father's signature into a machine." Something in her broke then. The hatred in her eyes was eclipsed by a wave of pure, desolate understanding. She had been beaten not by a rival, but by a set of principles she could never comprehend. One of the guards touched her elbow, gently but firmly. "Ma'am, we have to go." She didn't resist this time. She allowed herself to be led away, a ghost being exorcised from the building. The heavy conference room door swung shut behind her, and the latch clicked into place. The sound was soft, almost inaudible, but it was as final as a period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. I turned my gaze back to the large screen at the front of the room, as if on cue. An IT administrator, acting on the chairman's orders, was already updating the company's executive directory. I watched as the cursor moved to the line item for the chief financial officer. The name Renee Vale was highlighted, then deleted. In its place, a single, stark word appeared in the empty field. Vacant. I walked out of the conference room alone. The board members remained, their hushed, urgent voices already beginning the work of rebuilding the company's narrative, of patching the hole that had been blown in the 42nd floor. I did not wait for their thanks or their condolences. I had not done it for them. I took the elevator, the smooth, silent descent, a mirror of my journey that morning. But the feeling was entirely different. I had ascended in a state of controlled, simmering readiness. I was descending in the quiet, hollowed-out aftermath of a war. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound and bone-deep weariness. The lobby was transformed. The bright, clinical morning light had been replaced by the soft, warm glow of the evening sconces. The morning's frantic energy was gone, replaced by the hushed calm of the after-hours. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the ventilation and the distant murmur of traffic on the street outside. It was a stage after the play has ended. The audience gone home. The ghosts of the day's drama still lingering in the air. I walked across the polished marble, my footsteps the only sharp, distinct sound. I walked back to the spot where it had all begun. Right here, by the security turnstiles, under the unblinking eye of camera C4. I stopped and looked down at the floor, at the place where I had stood when her elbow had connected with my face. It was just marble, gleaming and indifferent, wiped clean of the day's events. Instinctively, I raised a hand to my cheek. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the skin was tender, tight. My fingers brushed against a small, rough patch near my mouth, the dried blood. I didn't try to wipe it away. That morning, it had been a mark of shame, of violence. Now, it felt like a seal, a line of ink on a contract that had been fulfilled, a final, physical piece of evidence that the debt had been paid in full. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a low hum against my leg. I pulled it out. The screen bright in the dim lobby. There was an email, sent 2 minutes ago. The sender was the Foxgate Ethics and Compliance Committee. The subject line was clinical. Resolution of your formal complaint. I opened it. The language was dense with legal jargon, a carefully constructed wall of corporate prose, but the meaning was clear. The committee has approved your request for full medical expense reimbursement. Furthermore, your status as a protected whistleblower under company policy and federal law is hereby formally recognized and affirmed. Any acts of retaliation will be met with the severest possible consequences. It was the company's way of saying, "We're sorry, You were right. You are safe now. It was the official receipt for my pain. I closed the email and opened my banking app. My fingers moved with a steady, deliberate purpose. I navigated to the escrow account, the one I had so carefully fed for 3 months. The balance was there, waiting. A pool of money held in legal stasis. I initiated a final transfer. Not to myself, not to a lawyer. I transferred the entire amount, down to the last cent, back to its point of origin. Recipient: the Foxgate Employee Housing Trust. In the memo line, where one might write rent or payment, I typed a short, simple phrase. Return to rightful owner. I hit confirm. The transaction was instant. A small green check mark appeared on the screen. A loop had been closed. A balance had been restored. One last piece of business. I scrolled through my text messages to the anonymous number. The last message was still there. The ugly image of my own face. The taunting question, was it worth it? My thumbs moved across the keyboard, typing out my final reply. It was not an answer to her question. It was a statement of fact, the one truth that had underpinned this entire affair. The apartment was never yours. I sent the message. I did not wait for a reply. I didn't care if she read it, if she raged, if she wept. It was not for her. It was for me. It was the closing line in a conversation I had been forced into. Then, I pressed and held the number, and a small menu popped up. I selected block this caller, a final quiet click, an erasure. I slid the phone back into my pocket and looked up. Ahead of me were the massive glass doors of the main entrance. In the dark glass, I could see my own reflection, a hazy, ghost-like figure suspended between the warm light of the lobby and the cool, dark blue of the evening outside. I saw a woman with a tired expression and a dark, ugly bruise on her cheek. But her eyes were clear. She was not hunched in defeat or cowering in fear. She was standing straight. She looked like a woman who no longer had to prove anything to anyone. A woman who was, finally, at peace. You okay? The voice was soft, startling me out of my reverie. It was a young analyst from the logistics team, a man named Ben, leaving late. He was standing a few feet away, his own satchel slung over his shoulder, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. He, like everyone else, had heard the stories. I turned to face him, and a real, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that day. It was small, and it probably looked strange on my bruised face, but it was real. Yeah, I said, my voice a little hoarse. I'm okay. The receipt spoke for me. He nodded, understanding completely. He gave me a small smile of his own, and then walked away, his own footsteps echoing as he headed for the parking garage. I was alone again. I turned back to the doors, to the city waiting outside. I reached out and put my hand on the cold, steel handle. I pulled. The door swung open, and the city rushed in to meet me. A gust of wind, cool and smelling of the river, washed over me. A clean, sharp scent that blew away the last traces of the day's sterile, air-conditioned confinement. The sounds of the street, the rumble of a bus, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of 100 conversations swelled up, swallowing the quiet of the lobby. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, into the river of noise and light and life. The door swung shut behind me, its soft whoosh a final, unheard punctuation mark. I did not turn around. I did not look back. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me. I'd love to connect with all of you. So please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And to give it an extra boost, please support the story by hitting that hype button so it can be heard by more people.